Well, thank you, everyone. I made a little PowerPoint, and I'm primarily thinking about this as an opportunity to have a shared conversation, um, because I feel like there is a lot of wisdom in the room, and I will say some very brief things just to sort of set us off, and then we'll move into having a more conversation with multiple voices. So if you are able to unmute, then you can, when we move into the conversation, just unmute yourself. And if you aren't able to participate with audio, you can use the chat, and we'll hopefully hear lots of different voices. So I will start off by telling you a little bit about myself. I grew up in Los Angeles. I went to college in St. Louis. I taught in St. Louis and in San Diego, mostly in the early childhood and elementary settings. And I taught mostly in Title I settings, which means kids that are um, on some dimension involved with free and reduced lunch. And now I live in Somerville. I'm a PhD student in education, and I'm specializing in sociology of education, and my background is in political philosophy. So I did a lot of thinking in my undergrad about democracy, deliberative democracy specifically, um, and a lot of what we thought about was values and values that might be in tension. So that's going to be the lens that we approach this conversation with, unless other people want to make connections elsewhere, and then we'll follow your lead. But I don't have a heavy sort of philosophy framing beyond um, naming values and the values that might be in tension. So when we think about young children, I think children up to age 18 could be, considered young children, depending on what you're comparing to. And so when we're talking, um, it could be helpful for you to name the age that you feel like certain values are most relevant to, as you're raising your own children or working with other people's children. And when I approach this conversation, I mostly am thinking about children ages 3 to 12, because that is mostly my professional experience. So the way I'm sort of framing this is thinking about mostly um, young children in school settings, but I think it can also really apply to young children in family settings or other settings. So we know there's deep disagreement about what is appropriate to have conversations with children about and the way that those conversations should go. So I am using this as sort of a framing case. The book Julian is a Mermaid is a story about a young child. Um, my mentor teacher, when I taught, used this book as part of the curriculum in class. And it's a story about a young child who's exploring their gender identity and dressing and acting in gender nonconforming ways. Um, at the same time, we have legislation that's increasing across the country, where school districts or states are increasingly restricting topics that they feel teachers should discuss in school, and that is largely um, in response to some amount of popular pressure. And I think it's debated how much popular pressure that's in response to. But this is a great example because this Florida bill is specifically restricting discussions like the discussion that my mentor teacher had about Julian as a mermaid. And we might have opinions on which one is appropriate, and hopefully we can surface some of those thoughts tonight. Um, as we're talking, I would love for us to name the values that we prioritize when we think about raising people's children, whether that's our own children or other people's children, and if we feel that we have different values at stake in each of, if it's my own child versus if it's someone else's child. Um, and also to think about the types of difficult topics that can come up with young children. So I brainstormed a list, and I am happy to share um, this list with you all, but I am debating whether I should share it because I'm sure we all have our own ideas of what topics are difficult. But I was thinking about violence, identity, and sort of the isms. Um, Also climate change and other things that I'm sure are top of mind. But when we think about difficult topics, I think it's helpful to think about these topics as things that people often say are not appropriate to talk about with young children, and then unpacking the conditions under which it's not appropriate or why it might be appropriate and how we would make that decision. So, I have several case scenarios that we can use to explore this conversation as a jumping off point, but I wanted to pause right there just to get initial reactions if you feel that there are difficult topics that you were thinking about that is not on my list that you were hoping we would address or at least consider in this session. And I'll add it to the list and then put it in the chat so that we're all on the same page to start off. So if you are thinking of a difficult topic that is not on this list that you think should be, please unmute or put it in the chat now, and I'll add it to our list.
Maybe
I have
death.
one to add. Oops, go ahead, Mary, please.
Thank you. Death. Yep.
That's what I was going to say.
Death is a great one. Let's see. Yep. Religion. Yeah. Religion and ethics. Poverty and homelessness. Yep. Great. Any other ones that we want to be keeping in mind? All right. Addiction. Yep. That's a great one too. Great. And for the sake of keeping it bounded, I think we'll think about talking to children maybe younger than 8, because I think that can be a helpful sort of upper bound. I know I had said up to 12, but I think it's a little bit different between middle childhood, but okay, cool. And let's also brainstorm some values that we prioritize when working with children. They could be our values, or I'll just say that people prioritize, because you don't have to necessarily endorse the values, but we'll just quickly brainstorm before moving into a case discussion. So one value that someone might prioritize with children is safety, honesty, yep,
Kindness.
kindness,
Accountability, honesty. Oh, yeah, I guess that's the same. Yeah.
tolerance, innocence, yep, courage, divergence and dissent, resilience, identity. Awesome. And we probably already are thinking of ways that the values on this list are at times incompatible with one another. Okay, I don't know what's happening with the list. It's but we have it in the chat already. Okay, great. So I have several case studies that we can think about. And I think what we'll do is spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes talking about one of the cases that I have prepared, and then if someone wants to offer their own case, then we'll spend the second half of our discussion time unpacking that case. Um, so I have several. Um, there, we'll use this one because I think this is appropriate for the age group. And this is a case taken from um, a book called Raising White Kids, which is talking about having conversations about race and identity with young children. And the author of the book writes this in the first part of the book, kind of motivating what brought her to her understanding of her racial identity. And I'll read it out loud and then we can start unpacking it together. It says, standing outside the bathroom at Stedman Elementary, where I was in first grade, my friend Jay walked up to me. You know, Jenny, she said, we should start a white girls club. I must have looked as confused as I felt because she continued, you know, because there are only 6 white girls in this class. I had never considered such a thing. Now I looked down at my arm, and for the first time in my 6 years of life, it occurred to me that that's exactly what I was, a white girl. This new recognition started to wash over me, but I had no time to think about what it might mean before we were sharply interrupted. And she goes on to explain that the teacher came and said, we're not going to talk about that. Don't ever say that again. That's super inappropriate. And the reason I stopped it there is because I wanted to hear from you all how you would respond, but even more importantly, what values you feel are at stake in this situation.